So a couple of years ago, a great article came out in Halad magazine that I kind of filed away to talk about in the future. And it talks about the attitudes of Russian people specific to the war, both before the invasion and after the invasion, and kind of the thought process of the Russian individual surrounding this war in Ukraine. Because frankly, before the war with Ukraine, various surveys around Russia showed that most Russians neither expected nor desired the war. However, once it started, these same surveys indicated a significant shift with considerable support for the invasion among the Russian population. Social scientists are now trying to understand both the active and passive justifications for the war after it seemed like that wasn't present before the war. Research into the reasons people support the war reveals a complex mix of ideological justifications, ranging from defense against a perceived imminent attack by Ukraine and Western countries to claims of protecting the suffering residents of Donbass. According to the Laboratory of Public Sociology, those who most actively support the war often use geopolitical arguments, asserting Russia's long-standing conflict with the West and the necessity to counter Western dominance. Beneath these claims, however, lies an uncomfortable awareness of the injustices and crimes that Russia is perpetuating in Ukraine, which are often dismissed or overlooked due to the influence of Kremlin-Rand propaganda. Journalist Shura Burton, in his studies of the Russian attitudes towards the war, highlights the inconsistency in supporters' views here. He notes the fragile nature of their statements and their reluctance to acknowledge the harsh realities of the conflict. Burton quotes Ukrainians to Russians that Ukrainians are asking the question, are the Russians not aware of what's really going on? And he finds that while most Russians claim ignorance, they often reveal a deeper awareness during interviews. Within minutes, supporters of the war confess to the bombing of cities and civilian casualties, yet they choose to deny or ignore these facts, even when presented with direct evidence from people they trust. Burton points out that outright support for civilian casualties is very rare, obviously. Instead, the interviewees acknowledge the situation but find ways to deny its impact. When analyzing statements that support the war, it becomes evident that the Russians are using a common set of justifications known as neutralization techniques. These methods, originally described by American criminologist David Matza and his colleague Gresham Sykes, explained how juvenile delinquencies attempted to evade guilt, but were later applied to state criminals by criminologist Frank Naubacher. These techniques appear frequently in both propaganda and discussions about the actions of Russian authorities when it comes to Ukraine, and they include a denial of injury or wrongdoing, which means claims such as our troops do not attack civilians, or we only target military infrastructure, or casualty reports are exaggerated are common. And you all see them in my comment section. These are very much the exact same things that many of the pro-Russians that come to my comment section say over and over again, almost to the letter. Other assertions include accusations that Ukrainians are bombing their own cities and denying that Russian soldiers are committing any crimes. Part of this also is denying the victim. This involves labeling the victim as Nazis or fascists or nationalists or drug addicts even, or stating that they ignored Russia's concerns and aspired to join NATO or attack the Donbass and are seeking to destroy Russia. They also deny responsibility. The argument here is that we had no choice, suggesting that if Russia had not acted, Ukraine would have posed an imminent threat. They go on to condemn the condemners. This is a retort to international criticism, claiming that everyone hates us anyways, and then they proceed to compare Western actions in other countries like Iraq and Afghanistan to justify their own behavior. They also appeal to higher loyalties, and this includes statements like, we are fighting for our security and to protect our homeland and the people of Donbass, urging support for soldiers and discouraging criticism during wartime. Additionally, euphemisms are used to mask the realities of war here, with terms like special military operation replacing war, and demilitarization and denazification. So why do people resort to these neutralization techniques? Well, government repression is a significant factor here for sure. From the onset of the war, the Kremlin has enforced silence and demanded compliance, persecuting those who dissent. Faced with the threat of reprisal, many Russians complied, despite their internal reservations. There's also a profound psychological need to deny and rationalize distressing realities, rooted in what social psychologist Melvin Lerner termed the belief in a just world. This belief makes it difficult to accept that one's country or society could commit such heinous acts, because acknowledging such realities threatens one's sense of internal security and moral integrity. People often refuse to fully understand or acknowledge the reality of a situation because accepting it as true could threaten their personal and social identity. An informant in a study by the Laboratory of Public Sociology expressed this sentiment when he said, quote, "We must be right about something because how else can we live on?" This ideology was prevalent in Nazi Germany as Germans turned a blind eye to the Holocaust. Additionally, there is significant fears of social ostracism. When the majority appears to support the war, speaking out against it risks severe consequences, such as being labeled a traitor, being expelled from a university, or getting fired from a job. People also fear criticism from their family, their neighbors, and colleagues. Journalist Shura Burton cites an example in his work where one interviewee explained her conformity not as a sense of pride, but out of necessity, saying, quote, "In saying that she shared the fate of the country, she was not bragging, but rather explaining that she had no choice. People in the community to which she belonged loved Putin and supported the war. To live among them, she had to agree," end quote. This need to justify one's stance and maintain positive self-image can cause intense physical and psychological discomfort when faced with accusation of immorality or insensitivity. For those who know people supporting the war, attempts to convey the truth often results in a stronger resistance. They dig in their heels. Such behavior aligns with criminologist Albert Cohen's theory on the status of frustration and reaction formation, which describes how individuals intensify their behaviors and seek validation from their peers when criticized. People are often openly defensive when presented with the realities of what Russia is doing in the war, saying instead, the Ukrainians, any foreigners, those who left Russia, they don't love us, they hate us, and they blame us. So we're not going to change just to please them. Faced with a global outcry of what Russia is doing in Ukraine, Russians internalized. They focused on themselves, and the popularity of the t-shirt you see in front of you printed with, quote, "We are not ashamed," exploded. All of these attitudes reflect a broader, cynical view of the world where people wish to be left in peace. There is a deeply rooted Russian cultural tradition of withdrawal into private life from the harsh public realities. Denial is not new to observers of totalitarian states. Studies on German views during the Holocaust, for instance, showed widespread inaction and denial about the atrocities, often pinning blame on individual officers rather than acknowledging systemic issues. Similarly, during Stalin's reign, there was widespread denial and justification for his repressive actions. In contemporary Russia, it's clear that many are aware of ongoing wrongs, though this awareness often does not translate into public acknowledgement. It is stifled by the regime's control over public discourse. In reality, we're not going to really see a whole lot of change in the Russian attitude because either they're going to be repressed, accepting it, or they're just going to retreat into private life and ignore it.